All right, let's dive into a story that's, well, it's both fascinating and disturbing. David Grann's Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah.
It's about the Osage Nation in Oklahoma back in the 1920s. They went from, poverty to incredible wealth almost overnight.
Wow.
Oil was discovered
Mm.
on their land. But sadly, all that prosperity made them targets.
Yeah, you're right. It is kind of a tragic irony when you think about it.
Right.
You would think sudden wealth would make their future more secure.
Yeah.
Instead, it really opened them up to just this wave of exploitation and violence.
Yeah, and a big part of that vulnerability came from this forced guardianship system. It was this policy where the U.S. government, they said it was for protection,
Yeah.
but they assigned white guardians to manage the Osage's money.
It's a system that Grann really argues was inherently racist, and it was set up to control the Osage and their wealth.
Yeah.
There's this one example. It's chilling. This guy, John Ramsey, he was like a prominent white guardian. He basically took advantage of the system and ended up with a fortune just by manipulating the Osage, who he was supposed to be taking care of.
Wow.
These people ended up in poverty while he was living in this lavish mansion.
That's awful. That just shows how deep the exploitation ran.
Yeah.
So you have the Osage living in this really tense environment,
Right.
and then people start turning up dead.
Yeah, and the murders, the way they unfold, it's like something out of a mystery novel.
Yeah.
It starts with these subtle deaths, people getting sick, or it looks like they had an accident.
Okay.
But then things escalate fast.
Uh-huh.
You start seeing poisonings, shootings, entire families wiped out.
That's terrifying. Grant doesn't hold back on showing that brutality. It really gives you a sense of the fear the Osage must have felt.
Yeah.
And that's when a brand new FBI, desperate to prove themselves, enters the picture.
Right. J. Edgar Hoover. He always wanted to expand the Bureau's power.
Of course.
So he puts together a team of agents led by Tom White, a former Texas Ranger, to investigate the murders.
Okay, so we have White, this classic lawman, coming into what sounds like a really messy situation.
It was.
What was special about his investigation?
Well, his approach was really groundbreaking for the time. He used undercover agents.
Oh, wow.
He even brought in forensic accountants, which was basically unheard of back then.
Really?
Grann really highlights how this case, helped shape the FBI's techniques, going forward.
Wow. So this case wasn't just about solving these crimes. It was about defining the FBI, how they would work for years to come.
It really was. And what White finds is way more disturbing than anyone expected. It wasn't just a few bad guys acting alone. This was systematic.
Oh, no.
A calculated effort to get rid of the Osage people and take their wealth. A conspiracy that went all the way to the top of Oklahoma society.
If this conspiracy was so big, how many people were actually involved?
Right.
And were there more victims than the official records show?
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes this story so haunting.
Yeah.
Grann really goes deep, he goes through all these records, visits the Osage reservation,
Oh.
even interviews, descendants of the victims.
Wow.
He finds evidence suggesting that the real number of victims could be way higher than anyone ever imagined.
It's hard to wrap your head around that.
It is.
We're talking about a deliberate campaign to terrorize an entire group of people.
And Grann's work shows how embedded this exploitation was,
Yeah.
in Oklahoma society. Corrupt lawmen, greedy businessmen, even everyday folks just turning a blind eye
Wow.
or even taking part in it.
It sounds like the whole system was working against the Osage.
Yeah.
But in all this awfulness, Grann focuses on this one woman, Molly Burkhart.
Right.
She's Osage, and she lost so many family members to these murders.
She did.
I found her story so powerful.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little more about her?
Molly is like the heart of the story, She's how Grann shows the real human cost of all this.
Right.
Here's a woman who lost her mother, her sisters, even her cousin,
Oh, my gosh.
and yet she refuses to be silenced.
Yeah, she was not just trying to get justice for her family either, right?
Right.
She became this voice for the whole Osage community,
Yeah, she really did.
pushing for the investigation and demanding accountability.
Exactly. She wanted answers.
It's really inspiring how strong she was in the face of such tragedy.
It is.
It shows the strength of the Osage people,
Yeah,
their determination to survive and keep fighting.
exactly.
This adds a whole other dimension to this whole story. It's not just some crime from the past.
Yeah.
It's about the Osage people's spirit.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, how did the FBI, this new agency, handle such a complex case?
Well, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Some of the people responsible were brought to justice,
Uh-huh.
but a lot of them got away with it.
Really?
And the system itself, with all its prejudice, it didn't really change that much.
So even with the FBI involved, justice wasn't really served.
No, not completely, but it was a shift.
How so?
Before the Osage case, crimes against Native Americans were often ignored,
Really?
especially by federal authorities.
Wow.
Yeah. So Hoover, he was trying to make the FBI look good,
Of course.
but he inadvertently ended up creating a way to investigate these crimes in the future.
Interesting. So this horrible case shaped the FBI and how they dealt with crimes against Native Americans going forward.
You could say that, but we have to remember that Hoover was a flawed person.
Oh, yeah.
His actions later on, especially during the Civil Rights era, they really tarnish his legacy.
Right.
But with the Osage murders, he brought national attention to it.
Yeah.
And he pushed the FBI to be more active in protecting Native Americans.
It's amazing how this one case had such a huge impact, both good and bad.
It really did.
But this isn't just a story about the past,
Right, you're absolutely right.
Grann makes it clear that the struggles the Osage faced didn't stop in the 1920s.
He does.
They're still going on today, from environmental damage to just being pushed to the side.
Absolutely.
Killers of the Flower Moon is a reminder of those struggles.
It is.
It's like a wake-up call
It is.
that we still haven't achieved true equality or justice.
You're right. It forces us to confront our own biases.
Yeah.
And look at the systems that keep inequality going.
Yeah.
And think about how we can dismantle them.
That's a powerful message, especially today.
It is.
When we're dealing with all these issues of systemic racism and what colonialism has left behind.
It reminds us that history isn't just something we read in books.
Right.
It affects us now, and we need to learn from the past.
Yeah.
And admit to the mistakes that were made.
For sure.
And try to build a better future for everyone.
And speaking of bringing the past to life, we have to talk about Martin Scorsese's movie,
Yeah.
Killers of the Flower Moon. What do you think about how the film handles this story?
Yeah, it's an interesting take on it.
Yeah, it really does offer a fresh perspective, doesn't it?
Definitely Scorsese. He really made a choice to kind of shift things, and give more attention to the Osage characters.
Yeah.
Their voices, what they went through.
And that's powerful, right? Especially for this type of story.
Oh, yeah.
Where you usually see the white investigator as the hero.
Right, exactly. Instead of the FBI being the ones who solve everything, it really highlights the strength of the Osage people.
Yeah.
We see them trying to find justice within their community,
Yeah.
even when the system is against them.
That must be tough.
It is.
It makes you think about how these stories get told.
It does.
Whose voices get heard.
Yeah, whose stories get told, who gets to be the hero.
Right.
These are really important questions, especially when you're dealing with trauma like this.
Yeah, and even though the film changes some things, it still stays true to the main message of Grann's book.
It does.
That the Osage murders were not isolated incidents, but part of this bigger systemic problem.
That's right. It really drives home the point that Native Americans have faced this kind of exploitation for a long time.
Yeah.
It didn't just end in the 1920s,
No, absolutely not.
It might look different now, but it's just as harmful.
When I was reading Grann's book, I was really struck by Anna Brown's story.
Yeah.
This young Osage woman whose death was first called a suicide.
Right.
What makes her story so important?
Her case really shows how thorough Grann was and how complex this conspiracy was. He finds all this evidence that suggests her death was actually a murder.
Oh, wow.
It was connected to her inheritance and a Noit guardian who would have gotten her money if she died.
Like peeling back the layers of something really awful.
Yeah.
You find one crime and it leads to all this corruption.
It really does. And the thing is, even with all Grann's work, a lot of the people who did these things never faced justice.
So we may never know the whole truth.
It's hard to accept, but that might be the case. But even if full justice wasn't served, Killers of the Flower Moon does something important,
What's that?
It brings the truth to light and it honors the victims.
Yeah, and it reminds us that we can't ignore these injustices.
We can't.
We have to learn from the past and make a better future.
I think what's really powerful about this story, whether you read the book or watch the movie, is that it makes us look at ourselves.
Really?
Makes us think about our own biases
Yeah.
and how we might be contributing to systems that hurt others.
It's a call to action then.
It is.
to be more aware, more informed, and more active.
Right. Killers of the Flower Moon isn't just history, it's a reminder of the work we still need to do.
To make a fairer society for everybody.
Exactly.
To our listeners, I really encourage you to check out both the book and the film.
They're both great.
They offer different but equally important looks at this part of American history.
I agree.
As you explore this story, think about this. How can we use our knowledge of past injustices like the Osage murders to make a more just future for everyone?
It's something we all need to consider.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Killers of the Flower Moon. Until next time.